James, the first chapter, 27th verse. Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself unstained by the world. Oftentimes in the Bible, we find those words put together. We have orphan and we have widow. We have them put together. But why? And why was that such a big deal in the Old and New Testament? In the Old and New Testament. If we go back and look at Exodus, you should not afflict any widow or orphan. How do we treat our orphans? How do we treat them? Well, the reason why we see widows and orphans so much in the Bible put together is because orphan comes from the Greek orphanos. It's the same word that's used for fatherless. Wasn't always someone, oh, you lost both parents. No, an orphan can be a child who has lost one or both parents, orphanos. In the original Hebrew, that word was yathom, and it still meant fatherless, orphan, bereaved. So you wonder, well, how is that possible? Why is it that they're both put together so much in the Bible? Well, think about this. If the husband and father were to die, you'd instantly have a widow and an orphan. You'd have them both. And they were the most deprived in society. The word orphan, orphanos, means something. And children already meant a lot to God. So here's the thing. They were to be treated with honor, with respect. They were to be nurtured by their communities. They were supposed to be loved. They were supposed to be brought in. Even when tithes were taken, there were supposed to be provisions made for the orphans and the widows. How does it apply today? What are we saying here? Are we saying that widows and orphans are around today? Wait a minute. If widows and orphans are around today, what is the church's role in reference to their lives? Does that just change with the Old Testament? James 1:27. So let's jump ahead. So we know that orphanos was used, depending on what version of the Bible you're reading. You may see orphan, you may see fatherless. When the father died, that was the protector, the provider, the covering of that family. When he died, there was huge loss, not taken away from the mothers, not taken away from the mothers, not at all. The significance of the father cannot be diminished, and that's exactly what's happened. That's precisely what has happened. The role of the father has been diminished. So now in America, we are looking at the fact that we are number one in the world for fatherlessness. Our nation is number one in the world for fatherlessness. That wasn't always the case, and what happened? Valuetainment recently did a report about this. That is alarming. The consequences of absent fathers is devastating our nation, our children, our societies. You may be around an orphan right now and not even know it. Oh, you may not use the word orphan because that word is now meant something else completely. It now means losing both parents. But you may be around a child who lost one parent. You may have a child who's from a single parent household. So that child is technically an orphan. If that child has experienced the absence of the other parent, that child is an orphan. How do we treat that child? How are we raising that child? How are we nurturing that child? Or let's say the parent remarries. The parent remarries, so now the child has two parents, but guess what? That child is now a stepchild. And you may think step means to step in the place of the person that walked away, or stepped in a place that has been called to glory. You might be right in thinking that. That sounds reasonable. That sounds logical. Here's the thing. We have stepmother, stepfather. We have stepson, stepdaughter. We have stepbrother, stepsister. And if we think that step means to step in the place of someone who abandoned, then didn't that spouse experience abandonment? And yet we don't say step-husband or step-wife. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? So the word step doesn't necessarily fit with that, not completely. But when we look at the etymology of the word step, we come across the word steop, Steop. The word steop comes from Old English. It means bereaved, it means lost, it means orphan. So a stepchild is still an orphan, even from the original meaning of what step came from. A lot of children are walking around in pain because of loss. A lot of children are falling through the cracks in a major way in our nation because of loss. Are we standing in the gap for them? Number one in the world for fatherlessness. As a former stepchild and current stepfather, I implore you, I encourage you, if you are a stepchild, you have a father. If you're a step parent, you have a high calling. You have a charge that you have walked into. How do we treat stepchildren? How do churches nurture strong step parents? We got work to do. God technically is not our biological father. We can't take him on Maury. We can't do it. We wouldn't win. He is not our biological father. He had one begotten son, one and only begotten son. He stands in the gap. For those of you who are also step parents, whether you want to know this or not, you stand in the gap. God bless you.